Getting out of an abusive relationship early makes a huge difference.
And I'm proud to say I did come in as a victim, but I am a survivor.
Then I could see my mom. My mom was walking toward us. And I got excited. And I was like, there's my mom. And then he didn't stop.
I'm trying to keep it together, I said. I gave in to the tears. And I hated that.
It's not necessarily the easiest process. It's not necessarily the prettiest process, but it is the most effective process. Like, you can do this. I'm going to tell you 100% you can do this, and you're so worth it to do this.
I'm sure losing any child is a real arrow through your heart, but you know, she was great. She was a friend and a family member and our daughter.
There is one thing stronger in me than fear, and that's my determination.
And now, here's your host, Jen Lee.
Welcome back. This is Jen Lee, the creator and host of I Need Blue, Survivors Talk Surviving. If this is your first time joining us, I am happy you are here. If you would like to hear other stories or you have a story to submit, visit www.ineedblue.net. Please note, I Need Blue does contain stories which feature graphic content and could be triggering. Please seek help if needed. Remember, you always come first. There is a crisis of mental health for first responders. More first responders now die by suicide than in the line of duty. On my website, under the Get Help tab, you will find first responder resources listed. Visit www.ineedblue.net, click on Get Help. As always, if you need immediate assistance, dial 911. Jasmin is an Australian police officer dedicated to breaking the stigma of mental health within the first responder industry. Within the police force, she earned her qualification as a domestic violence investigator. She is here to share her experiences, like the time she was knocked unconscious in the line of duty as part of trying to restrain a violent offender. She hosts a podcast, Breaking the Stigma, Mental Health, and First Responders. The information will be posted in the show notes. Jasmin, thank you for all you do in protecting others. Welcome to the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much Jen for having me. I'm so excited to be on this podcast all the way from Australia. So our time differences, we've made them work, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. So for me right now, it is 7 p.m. And what time is it for you?
It's 9 a.m. over in sunny Gold Coast, Australia. Yes.
Love it. And I actually honeymooned there. We went to Fiji and then we went to Australia, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm a little familiar with what you have going on over there. It's beautiful. We had a wonderful experience, and we look forward to coming back. And maybe when I do, I can have an opportunity to meet you.
Yes, in person instead of e-meeting. That'd be nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I tell you what, let's go ahead and get started with today. I would love to know the moment you decided, I want to help people, I want to protect people, I want to be a police officer.
Yeah.
Because there are many ways you can protect people. So what made you decide that being the police officer was what you needed to do?
Yeah, so I really kind of fell into it, and I didn't realize that it's what I wanted to do until I actually got into it. So I had a very close friend of mine. I used to play volleyball with him, and he would come to volleyball. He'd been in the police force for years, and he'd come to volleyball and he'd tell me all these exciting stories. So, you know, the typical police story where they're going, you know, we got into a car chase and then the car crashed and he got out and he was jumping fences and I was jumping fences. And then he'd get right to the punchline and he'd stop. And, you know, everyone's on the edge of their seat, like, tell us what's going to happen. And he'd be like, I can't tell you that until you're a police officer. And it like grinded my gears so much because I was like, I just want to know what happens. So that was actually one of the pushing factors for me to go to a recruiting seminar. So it wasn't the primary reason for me to join, but it was the primary reason for me to actually look into it as a potential career, because all of the excitement. And so, yeah, I went to a recruiting seminar and sat down, and in these seminars, they have cadets at the time. So people going through the academy process, they come and talk to you, and then you have some experienced officers come through and they tell you about like the really rewarding parts of the job. So that was kind of what pushed me into going, okay, yeah, this is something that I really want to do, and not just for finding out the punchline and having the excitement, but also, you're in a role where when someone is really struggling, you are the first point of call. My hat goes off to psychologists and counselors and everyone that does that role. But something that I was so grateful that I got is we are that first point of call, and you can really make a difference. So that was kind of what got me into policing. Initially, it was the excitement, but, through the process, you learn that it's a lot more than just high-speed chases and chasing someone.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is actually one of the questions that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you tonight kind of goes into the interviewing process, which you went through. Now that you had been a police officer and you've been through it, what question or what information do you think was missing in the interview process to really prepare you for what you were jumping into? And if you can't answer that right now, we can come back to it, because that's kind of a deep thinking one.
It is, and I've thought a lot around that topic. I think what is lacking, and I can't speak for every police force, but definitely the one that I went through, is providing you with a real understanding of what you may encounter. Everyone knows that, you could get in a chase with a car and they could crash, but they don't really tell you that, okay, once that car crashes, you could be exposed to some pretty traumatic events, which could be the person in the front of that vehicle has whatever injuries they've got, or has that person crashed into another vehicle and there's an innocent party that you've got there. And now you have to deal with that innocent party and whether they're alive or not. And then if they're not, then you have to deal with their family as well. So there's a lot of emotion that goes into, you have all this excitement and you have this really cool job, but actually preparing you for what the negative side might be. And I think in that preparation of being able to be aware of what you could see actually would help mental health for first responders everywhere, because I think a lot of people are blindsided by it.
That's great. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that it would have been really helpful for you, a proactive approach, if you would have been given scenarios of really the dark side of what it is to be a police officer, the hard things that you see, the grotesque, the death, and then having to deal with the family. But if somebody in your training would have said that to you, would it have deterred you from moving forward? Or do you think that would have better prepared you to handle the situations that you were going to come upon?
I joined at 19, so I was quite young going through. So in that moment, I thought I was invincible, as every teenager does. Nothing was going to stop me from having the career as a police officer. And I think in that moment, if someone had told me this is what you may experience, it would have, better helped me prepare for that situation. And then in that situation, if you've got another person who's going, actually, do you know what? I don't want to see that. I don't think that's going to be good for me. That is the right point to stop them in that career, instead of them getting out on the road in a police car and then experiencing it and then possibly having some really bad side effects from it.
So in your situation, you knew this was your calling.
Yes. Yeah, I graduated, and it was just, there were days that I would go to work and I said to my colleagues, I felt bad for getting paid. Like, I had so much fun for the most part. And, you do have those events that are traumatic, but I was so lucky that I graduated to a team full of males. And that was a blessing and a curse because, I was like the little sister. So they really protected me and they took me under their wing. And I never felt like I was in danger in a team like that, which was amazing. So there were definitely days that I felt bad because you just go to work and you had fun.
That's awesome. I love that.
I did 12 months at the academy, which I didn't particularly enjoy because I don't like sitting behind a desk. I like moving and being practical. But I knew that once I graduated, it would be different. So as soon as I graduated and you started actually going through the process of going to jobs and helping people and doing all of that, that's when I was like, this is it. This is for me.
Did you do ride-alongs as part of your training?
Yeah, so we did two different ride-alongs. So I did one in, is it called the Bronx? It's like a really rough area. So I did one there, and then I did one on a nightclub strip. So all the drunks, all the drugs, all the fights, which I don't know why, but I loved it. And that's where I ended up graduating to. So I, had all of that fun for me.
Do you remember your first call when you were done with training, graduated, out on your own? Do you remember your first call?
I don't remember my first call. I remember my first ever arrest, which I think was the bigger, because in the nightclub strip, you get a lot of, just drunks. So they kind of go to the back of your mind, all the calls that you get about drunk people, because there's so many of them, you don't really remember. But my first arrest, I remember, I can tell that story, where it was a Friday night and the street is pumping. Intoxicated people everywhere, club music so loud, I'm sure I've painted the picture well. I don't know what it's like in the cities over there, but in the city that I worked in where the nightclub strip was, there were cameras everywhere. So there's been a guy who was a victim in the end who got king hit. Is that an American term as well, king hit?
No, but you can tell me what that means.
So king hit is just a really big punch, and it's kind of come out of nowhere. So a lot of the times it will happen from behind a person. They won't see it coming. It was a bit of a cowardly move. They don't have a chance to defend themselves.
Yeah, we call that a sucker punch.
Yes, a sucker punch. So that has happened, and the guy who has sucker punched, he has run off, as you would. And so my colleague is dealing with the victim who is unconscious on the ground, and our cameras have actually picked up where the offender has run to. So I've gone off and located this offender, and he's not me. I'm like, mate, come on, in probably the most bogan Aussie accent that you could picture. I'm like, mate, come on, we've got you on camera. Just admit it. Anyway, he didn't admit it, and I still ended up arresting him because we've got him on camera. So that was my first arrest. And I remember, when I was going into it, I was like, I know he's done something wrong, but my heart was racing. I'm like, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. Oh my gosh, just do it. It was really cool. It was a good moment.
When you talked about cameras, so do you have body cameras like we do here in the United States?
Yes. Yeah, we have our body cameras, and we also, like I said, in the area that I worked in, the city has lots of cameras, and then we have an external company that operates those cameras, and they have access to our radio channel. So when something happens like that, they can actually track the offender and come up on our radio channel and say, hey, we've just seen this happen. This is where the offender is. And it's really cool because you don't get away with much. In the city, you'd be very lucky to get away with something because there's just cameras everywhere.
Wow, that's interesting. So does Australia as a whole, or just the area where you were, have all of the cameras set up like that? Because we don't have that knowingly anyway in the United States.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is a lot of people wouldn't know that there's cameras. And, there's so many times in the station that I was at, we have the monitors or the screens set up so we can see the cameras. And there'd be so many times I'd see my friends. I'd be like, what are you doing in the city? Message them, what are you doing here? And they're like, how do you know? It's just everywhere. I'm watching you. So they could be everywhere.
Yeah, that's good and scary at the same time.
Yes.
Absolutely. Can you share an experience or two, either domestic violence call or whatever, that left you with trauma? Since we're going to talk about now how you help people with trauma, can you share some experiences that you went through?
Sure. So I had two in mind. The first one just popped to my head just then because we are talking about domestic violence. And I think I touched on, one of my best friends, she was in that really horrible domestic violence relationship. And he was really manipulative, would always be on her phone. I never knew if I was speaking to her or him, through text message, and was always controlling money. He was just not a very nice person, to put it politely. And I got called to a domestic violence job where it was nothing out of the ordinary, but it was the emotional manipulation, the abuse, the money, and it just reminded me of my friend. Because I felt so helpless with my friend, I've gone into this scenario and I just felt helpless. I ended up speaking with my colleague at the time and I said, look, this is actually really triggering me. I know there's no trauma, there's no physical abuse, I understand that, but it's triggering me because it's personal and I can relate it to something that's personal. So I remember I went back to the station after that job was finished, and I just had to take a moment for myself and kind of evaluate where I was with my friend and whether there was anything I could do to help her, because, the reason I ended up feeling helpless in that job is because I felt helpless with her. And then I just, spoke to my colleagues and tried to debrief and actually figure out why I was feeling that way. That was a really hard one for me because it was personal. I was relating it back to something that was very real in my life and I was struggling with.
And you're human, though. I have to imagine you probably were on several calls where some aspect of it was a little bit personal, and then you have to learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with that one in particular is because everything that the female was saying was conversations that I'd had with my best friend. And then the second scenario was the party, the nightclub strip, painting the scene. I was on a night shift, so you've got, drunk people everywhere. And we have a lot of Indigenous that come down from so we have the native lands that they live in. And then when it gets too cold, they'll come down to where my state is. One of them was walking around the city with a really massive stick. I don't know where he got it from, but he was like threatening people with this stick. So he's like lunging towards them, threatening them, like, I'm going to stab you with this stick. So we've been called to that. And I think 4 of us ended up going because he was quite a big guy and he had a big stick, like that's a weapon, he could swing at us, all that kind of stuff. So we've gone, we're trying to talk him down. As communication is the first point of call, we try not to pull out any tactical option if we can try and talk it down. So my colleague's talking to him. I've got my spray out. Police over in America have spray, like capsicum spray, just in case.
Like pepper spray.
Yeah, yeah. So I've got that out just in case, and so is my colleague. And so this guy has ended up lunging at my colleague, and he's tried to spray him, but this man has obviously been around the system for a little while and has, as soon as my colleague sprayed him, he's pulled his jacket up to cover his face, which is quite clever from him, but not good for us. And so then this guy has tried to run. So I've stepped in and grabbed him. And in the process, he's been able to punch me in the face. So he's punched me in the face and we're just falling down together to the ground. My head has hit the ground really hard and I was actually unconscious for, I think, 2 or 3 seconds. And then my colleagues were then dealing with him while I was still kind of on the ground trying to get my bearings. And then after that, I went back to the station. But the scariest part of it all is I actually don't know if I remember it or whether, because there was cameras everywhere and I saw the footage of it, whether I remember it because the cameras showed me what happened. And there's part of me that wishes that I never watched the footage because I want to know if I remember it. From there, you go to hospital and you get all your scans to make sure you're okay. And I was okay. But then it was probably months and months on after that I didn't want to go to any jobs with any of the Indigenous, which it was, a group of them, and he was just one of them in that group. So it could have been any group, it just happened to be them. And so I didn't want to go to any jobs with them. What if something happened again? They don't respect me. I had a few nightmares about it. I had ongoing physio treatment on my back and elbow from hitting the ground so hard. That was tough, and then I dealt with it. And then he went to court and he didn't get penalised for it. And so then that kind of re-traumatised me all over again, because this man is now out on the street and could do it to someone else, and he knows that he won't get penalised for it. So what's going to stop him from doing it again? That was my thought process.
Yep, we have a lot of that in the United States, unfortunately. It sounds like that experience shifted something in you.
Yeah, it did. I think prior to that experience, I was very confident when I had to go hands-on with someone. So whether I had to grab them to arrest them or just grab them to de-escalate a situation, it looks like they're about to fight, so you grab them and you go, just calm down a little bit. After that, I lost confidence in doing that, and only because, it's different when you've been assaulted and you now have a different outlook on, okay, people don't care. Not all people, but some people don't care that I am still a human, and that, I still want to go home to my family and I still have a life outside of this. And I feel like some people have a belief that when you join the police force, you should expect that you're going to get assaulted and that it's part of the job, but it's not, and it shouldn't be. So it definitely changed my outlook on, going hands-on.
You do have guns, though. Law enforcement does have guns in Australia.
Yes, we do. It's very, I don't want to say hard, but it is not common for people to pull out their guns. I think just because of the difference in gun laws from America to Australia, very, very uncommon to hear that someone's pulled out their gun. And you could go your whole career, I never pulled out my gun. And I'm very, very thankful for that.
Did you ever lose someone? Let's say, for example, somebody had gotten beaten up and you were providing CPR, waiting for the ambulance, the EMTs to arrive, and they didn't make it. Did you ever have to experience that, which is a real part of your job as a first responder?
There were a few fatal crashes that I went to where the person was still alive when you get there. And then slowly, ambulance still get there, and there's kind of nothing that you can do. It's the hardest ones are when you've got the family there as well, and that there's no hope for this person because they're very, very rapidly decreasing in their health and they're losing a lot of blood and there's nothing you can do. And then you've got this distraught family. I think a lot of the times for me, there's more pain in having to deal with the trauma from the family than the, dead person, unfortunately. It is so hard because you don't know how to comfort them. Everyone grieves differently. You want to give them that space and you want to provide care, but because everyone is so different, you don't know how you can do that for them.
Right, because a lot of people in that moment that are suffering, they don't know what they need.
Yeah.
They're just numb, they're lost.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I suppose you could say that is a very helpless situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of times you'll hear the spouse of a first responder say he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't talk about anything.
Yeah.
We're talking right now about how important it is to talk to people that aren't in the force. So what encouraging words, what advice would you give to that officer that's holding it in? And what advice would you give to the spouse who's trying to get him to talk?
I think for the spouse, you just really need to give them space, because a lot of the time when you go to something traumatic, you don't want to talk about it straight away. So as a spouse, you can recognize that something is wrong, but just tell them like, hey, it looks like you're struggling. If you are, remember, I'm always here. So you're not pushing them to tell you, because I think the more you push, the more they're going to push you away. So just reminding them, hey, I'm here when you're ready, no pressure. If you want to talk, if you don't want to talk to me, I know other people that you could talk to. It doesn't have to be the spouse, but just talking to anyone is good. And I think it's hard for us to remember that, as much as we want to be strong, our spouses know what we go through. They see it in our body language. They see it when we come home from work. They might even see it on the news. They see jobs that we go to on the news platforms. They're going to be understanding that you're going to some pretty traumatic stuff. And just remembering that you don't have to protect them. You protect the community, but your spouse is there to bounce things off of. And, they're going to come home and tell you, Stacey in the office was, gossiping and it was bad today. Just like, you need to come home and be like, oh man, like I went to this knife job today. Bring it down to like a normal level where you're just talking about work. Don't put this massive thing on it where, I've got to protect her or him, whoever the spouse may be, because you don't have to. They know you probably better than you know you. So just remember that.
Sometimes being left to think and left to your own devices, like for the spouse, could potentially be worse than if you just open up and share a little bit with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a very hard place for police to be in. And I think I can talk for first responders, but, I can especially speak for police. Is a lot of the times we go to an event and say it's right at the end of the shift and we haven't actually dealt with it. We don't know our emotions towards it because we've still got that adrenaline pumping. So to come home and talk about it straight away is really difficult. It's finding that happy medium for the spouse, if you think they're going to be worried about you or, you think you might be worried about you, maybe just send them a message and be like, hey babe, I went to this, job. I don't really know how I feel about it. I definitely want to talk to you about it, but maybe not when I get home. When I get home, just give me a big hug and let's watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine or something, just whatever you need, so that they know, okay, something has happened. They don't want to talk about it yet, but they do want to talk about it.
I think that's great advice.
One of my main key points to either people thinking about joining, recently joined, or have been in the job for a really long time is please, please, please make sure you have normal friends. And when I say normal, I mean people that are outside the police force, because they are the ones that are going to recognize when you are struggling. And I remember in my career, I went to a job where a guy was running at me with a knife. You talk to your colleagues about it and you go, oh, that was kind of fun, the adrenaline, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, what a laugh. And then you go home and you talk to your partner who's not in the job, who's what we call normal, and they go, hang on a second, Jazz, like that's pretty traumatic. I think you should take a moment and just see how you're really feeling. And that is so important because they bring you back down to earth and they remind you that you are a human too and you have the same feelings that they have. And just because you're expected to deal with this situation differently doesn't mean that you do. If you're going to listen to any part of this podcast, listen to this part. Normal friends are so, so important. And, like I said, with that knife job, the adrenaline was just pumping and I was on night shift and I got home and I couldn't sleep, but I just put it down to, it's night shift. I don't sleep well anyway. But you talk to someone normal, I guess, quote unquote normal, and they go, no, like that's pretty big. You would have had a massive adrenaline dump. Are you okay? And they're the people that you need to just remind you that bring you back down to earth and remind you that, it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely. You had the special qualification for the domestic violence. And can you share?
A really good friend of mine, not in the police force, she went through a pretty horrible domestic violence relationship. With domestic violence, it's something that I was already quite passionate about because you're taking someone who is really vulnerable. So you've got your victims who they're in this relationship and they think that, they're in love and it's a healthy relationship. And more often, they're people that, their parents have been in a domestic violence relationship and so on. So it is a very normal thing for them to be assaulted or, have their finances controlled, because that's all they've ever seen throughout their whole life. And there's so many different elements to domestic violence. But yeah, so my friend went through a pretty horrible domestic violence relationship, and my hands during that whole thing were tied because I couldn't do anything, because in my state, it wasn't illegal to do what her partner was doing, which was controlling her finances, not allowing her to see friends, very manipulative behaviours, but nothing physical. And I don't know what it's like in America, but here police can only intervene when it's become physical. But there's so many different elements to domestic violence that it is not just physical.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I have several topics on that. And I think a lot of times for our police, in regards to that, they're there to kind of de-escalate. Did you find that in your situation? The number one goal was to de-escalate the thing, make sure everybody was safe, like you said, but then to de-escalate?
Yeah, a lot of the times with the domestic violence jobs that we would go to, there's no violence, but there has been, you can see that they're both very worked up and they're both yelling, and, there's things thrown around, but there's no visible signs of injuries. And so for the most part, you've just got to separate them, talk to them separately to try and, get both stories, because both of them will have a story and then the truth lies somewhere in between, So, and then more often than not, if there has been no violence, it's just, do one of you have somewhere else to stay for the night so that you can go get your call somewhere else, take a deep breath, think about it all so you can both settle down and then revisit it tomorrow when you're calm.
Mm-hmm. This might be an uncomfortable question, and so you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but my question is, you went on a call and de-escalated, separated the individuals, and then later on down the road you found out that, let's say, he ended up killing his girlfriend or his wife, that it had escalated to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever experience that? Because we know when it comes to domestic violence, there's a pattern, and it tends to escalate.
Yeah, I am fortunate that never happened to me, that specific incident, but you hear of it happening and you can see the potential in some offenders to do that. So I made it like my sole mission every time we went to a domestic violence job that I would do everything I could to prevent that from happening. And even if there was no physical violence, story time, I had a lady one time, she was from a different country and she came over here and had a visa with a male that was a permanent resident. And he was so controlling and controlled the finances. She didn't admit that he was physical until later on in the process. But when I dealt with her, I said, there's not much we can do, but I can find you emergency accommodation, which is a service that we do have in South Australia where, if there is an element of domestic violence and it doesn't have to be physical, we can get them emergency accommodation. So I think I spent 8 hours on hold, because it's a long process to get her into this accommodation. And then 3 days later, because she'd been away from the offender and she'd finally felt comfortable where she was, she disclosed to a detective, so not myself, I wasn't on duty, all this physical abuse that had been happening to her. So sometimes it's not, they won't come forward with what they've got because they're scared. They're scared of what might happen. So even just taking them out of that place, showing them that there is a safe space and we can provide it to them, will then make them comfortable to think, okay, I'm okay now and I will tell you what's happened to me.
I really appreciate this conversation. I just hear about domestic violence a lot, and for law enforcement, my understanding is that it is one of the scariest calls.
Yeah, and it's because a lot of people get so heightened as well. You'll actually find that if you arrest the offender, the victim then gets really angry. And that comes from the base of the victim wants to show the offender that they don't want them to be arrested, because if they want them arrested, then they're going to have a hard time when the offender comes home. So it's a vicious cycle of domestic violence, where I think I read some stats recently in Australia where it's something like 30 times of domestic violence before a victim will actually call police. So that's 30 incidences of whether it's manipulation, abuse, physical, until they make their first phone call to police. And then it's something like 7 phone calls to police before they take action. So you can only imagine how much they've already been through. And so then for us, we really have to remember that we are their first point of call, and we really just need to be there for them, and show them that we can help them, and not get, I think there's a lot of police that sometimes get annoyed after they've been to a victim so many times and tried to help them so many times, but you never know which time is going to be the breaking point for the victim where they go, all right, I'm done.
Yeah, everything you just said is so important and relevant. I know a lot of times, in an abusive relationship or something, and the police were called, people's immediate reaction is you need to arrest him. Like you need to get him away. Just talking, the mental abuse and whatnot. It's not that easy. And I think the thing people don't realize is, while the outsider looking in, we want to protect, right? It's our ultimate goal, whether it be a family or a friend. But you brought up a great point, in that victim is the one that will pay the consequences if he's arrested and gets out and goes back.
Yeah, it is a very hard time. And I know in South Australia, we have legislation which is really great, in that even when the victim doesn't want to provide police with a statement and doesn't want to talk to police, if we believe enough in ourselves as the police officer that there is some sort of domestic violence happening in that scenario, we can arrest the offender without the victim's consent, to put that in place to try and protect the victim. But it also helps the victim in that even if they want to take action and they're too scared, we can tell the offender that he or she didn't want action. I'm doing it off my own back. And then hopefully in turn that actually protects the victim, where the victim can say, no, I didn't want it, the police just did it.
Do you think that the victim wasn't penalized by the perpetrator when they got back out?
It's a hard one, because you're already there for domestic violence. Whether it adds fuel to the fire, it might, but we go through the process of we arrest them, and then we put an intervention order in place, which is restraining order, to stop them from contacting, being close to them. And then if they breach that, then we've just got to keep arresting them and showing them that it's not okay to breach. It's a violence order at the end of the day. You can't be breaching something like that. And so if police are really proactive in doing that and arresting the offender for that, then hopefully they just get sick of seeing us. They just get sick of being arrested and going to the cells, because it's a process and the beds aren't comfy and the food's crap,
Right. Yeah, it's not meant to be comfortable. Yeah. Exactly. As a police officer, when you go in and based upon your own, like you said, you've assessed the situation, you feel like there is a warranted arrest, you take him away, or her, because, it goes both ways. In your heart, are you hoping that allows time for the victim to get out?
Yeah.
To go get the help that is needed? And if so, then what resources do you offer there for the victims?
It is a tough one, because we, in general in Australia, I think we're pretty understaffed for police. What I tried to do is, while I was still at the scene, do as much victim management as I could. And in victim management, I'm saying, I sit with the victim and I go, have you got someone you can call? Can you talk to someone? Have you got family? Have you got friends? Who have you got closest to you that you can call right now? Because even though we have these services that can help, a lot of the times they don't want to talk to a stranger. They don't want to talk to someone that they don't know. And half the time they don't even want to talk to police. So even if they don't respond to you saying, hey, have you got family? Have you got friends? Because sometimes they just completely ignore you, but you've planted that seed. You've in their brain, you've planted that seed of maybe I should give them a call. So it's just little bits and pieces you can do. And there are services, the emergency housing, like I was saying before, that we can put victims into. The hardest part with that is if the victim and offender live together, we don't like taking the victim out of their home environment. They're not in the wrong, so they shouldn't be the ones that are moved. So then a lot of the time you try and shift your focus to the offender and say, have you got family that you can go to? Have you got friends somewhere else you can stay? And so that the victim is still comfortable in their home, because a lot of them don't want to leave their homes. And I know that there's a really good program in South Australia through the courts there. We have specific domestic violence courts, and the program is for domestic violence offenders. They have this service that is targeted specifically for the offenders, which I think is amazing because you're really targeting it from the source. At the end of the day, the victim isn't the problem. Unfortunately, they've just been caught up in the whirlwind. And so this program for the offenders actually teaches them and has other males around, or females, but unfortunately, primarily we do see males around them that are going through the same thing, and they're starting to recognise that their behaviour is wrong. That's not how they should treat people. And a lot of the times it comes down to, like I said, the generational beliefs that have been passed on from their families. So just trying to break that cycle.
Yeah, break the pattern. You're exactly right about that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Here in the United States, we have a lot of shelters. A lot of times getting out of an abusive relationship, there's so much risk and it's scary. Say, for example, the woman finally gets the courage to go. So then she would go to the shelter, and there are shelters that accommodate kids as well as pets, because people stay because they don't want to leave their pet, right? They stay for several reasons, and that being one of them. So we have these facilities set up where they go. It's confidential, everything that they need. Now they can leave whenever they want, right? They're not held there. It's interesting that for you want to keep them in the home and get the perpetrator out. Where for here, I think the focus is more, we need to get you out of the home, at least initially get you out of there, and then eventually see what goes on with the perpetrator. So do you think that works well for you?
I've seen both sides of it because, with the benefits of emergency housing and shelters, I guess, is that the offender has no idea where they are. So once they get released from, the cells or prison, whatever it might be, they don't know where this person is, which is awesome. But we do see a lot of the times that victims just go, I haven't done anything wrong. Why should I have to move out of my house? And, they make a really good point as well. So when that happens, there are services in South Australia that, come and they'll walk through your house and look at your doors and go, okay, we need to install better security for your doors. Or they'll come through and they'll say, oh, maybe we could put some CCTV cameras in. But that's it's funny when I say cameras, is that sometimes that causes victims to be hypervigilant, which isn't a good state to be in as well. They'll be constantly checking the cameras to see if the perpetrator or the offender has returned. It's a very hard balance, and I don't think anyone has actually quite nailed how to deal with domestic violence. I think we're getting better, but it's definitely a really difficult one. And I guess that's where my passion comes from. It's because the amount of victims that I see that are just, I sit down with them and I just want to help them, and because they're in this situation where they feel lost, they feel stuck, and no one should feel that way, and especially from someone that they love, no matter what that person looks like and what that person has done to them. At the end of the day, they love that person. They can't change that. That's an emotion that they feel. And, we can't walk in there and go, that's not love. We can't define what their love is, so it's a really hard decision for them to make to actually end up leaving. And I think there's a lot of people that just need to respect that a little bit more.
So as a police officer, when you went to the domestic violence calls, the majority of the time, did you feel helpless? Or was there a different emotion that tended to be almost universal on all of those calls?
For the victims, a lot of the times you could see frustration, embarrassed. A lot of them were embarrassed. They don't like admitting that there's something wrong in their relationship, especially if there's kids involved. I think those were the main two, was, frustration that it's happened and that police have had to have been called, and embarrassment that police have been called, because I think a lot of people think it's shameful when police have to get involved in their personal life. Occasionally you'd get anger, especially if it was a neighbour that called it in, so they've heard yelling and they're going, "We didn't even want you here." And it's like, okay, well, someone's obviously concerned about you, and you should be really grateful that you have amazing neighbours that are going to look out for you like this, but they still don't want you there. That's probably the hardest time, is because then you've got, both parties are angry and you're trying to deal with it.
And so for you then, going into that, the situation, how did it make you feel?
I think it depends from situation to situation. A lot of the times I was quite good at talking with females. So, and more often I'd be paired with a male partner. So, they'd go deal with the male and I'd go talk to the female. And a lot of the times, you can talk them through your own concerns. You go, "Look, we've been called. Why do you think we've been called?" So you kind of put it back on them for them to say the reasons. Because if you just say it at them, they're going to, brush it off. They don't really care what you have to say. But if you can try and get them to acknowledge why police have been called, then you can slowly get reasons flowing out of them as to maybe there are some issues and, maybe we can take action. But it is hard when people don't want to talk to you and you can see that there's an issue. And that's a time where you do feel a little bit helpless, but it's also a time where you just need to switch on a little bit more, in the sense of, look around the house, see whether there's damages to the walls. Like, has there been stuff thrown around? Are there kids? Are there neighbours that you can talk to that may be able to provide more of an insight into the relationship that we're dealing with at the scene? But, even injuries, there's a lot of people try to hide injuries, but they're not very good at it. So got to make sure that you're observing people and their behaviours and how they're acting, because body language is a massive thing as well. We can help whoever we want to help. And that's the beauty of it.
You've shared a lot, and I really appreciate it. Let's talk now about the trauma in your podcast and the amazing things that you are doing to help other first responders, because there is so much, like counseling the families, that we don't think about. In line with that, if there are other things like that we don't think about that you do, that you're like, gosh, if people knew this is other parts of the job, they might look at us totally differently.
Yeah, sure. For listeners, I am no longer in the police force. I left 4 months ago, and just off my own back I was struggling with my mental health for a lead up of various events, it kind of all bubbles up, and I just needed space to deal with it. I couldn't continue working and dealing with my mental health. I needed to actually take some time away from that field to be able to focus on myself. But in leaving, I discovered that I'm not alone, and I say that with a smile on my face, but it's also a little bit sad in that, there's a lot of people that have since reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jazz, I'm really struggling. I really love what you're doing, in that you left because you needed to look after your mental health." And it's not normal for people to do that. It's more normal to stay and then stay and stay, and then it's too much and they end up, PTSD or other forms of trauma. So yeah, off the back of that, I was like, how can we break this stigma of mental health? And so that came my podcast, Breaking the Stigma. Specifically for first responders, I just want people to understand that it is normal to have trauma in a job like that, and it is normal to experience mental health issues. So with the podcast, I'm hoping that the more people that talk about it, the more normal it becomes to actually talk about it in the workplace. You know, now I'm in a spot where I'm healed and I am doing fantastic and it's amazing. But I'm in a place now where I can help other people as well. And that's 100% my mission, because I still have so many good friends in the police force. And there are so many good people in the, not just police force, but like first responders. You know, most of them are there because they want to help people. And how extraordinary is that? You know, you've got this whole amazing group of people that just want to help people. And so we need to help them. And so that's my little part of the pie where I'm like, okay, to help them, I want to make talking about their mental health normal, because that will help.
I love it. And your passion is amazing. It comes through in the way you talk, the words. You can tell you're smiling even without looking at you, your excitement. I love it. Let me ask you, blue suicide, is that an issue?
Yeah, it is. It's really difficult because it's not promoted, which it shouldn't be, but sometimes you find out about it in the wrong way. So someone will go, oh, did you hear about so-and-so, they did this? And they're not taking into account that you may actually know so-and-so and you may actually know them really well. And just hearing it like that is not a nice way of hearing about it. You know, you'd probably prefer to be sat down and go, hey, Jazz, like I know you were really good friends with them. I just want to let you know that this has happened. Here's some space. If you want me to be here for you, I can. If you want me to contact a counsellor, I can, rather than just, mentioning it in passing. There needs to be some sort of awareness around it and how to deal with it appropriately.
They always talk about the blue family. You're all the family. And so when somebody becomes ill or is killed in the line of duty or blue suicide, God forbid, there usually is grief counselors brought in or something to help. Like you, it was a shock and then sadness, and you're left trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, just pick up the pieces. It's never been a colleague, as in they've never been on my team. They've just been people that I've known. In that scenario, I hope that the grief counsellors were brought in to help, the people that were close to them in the workplace, but it's never broadened to a bigger area. So I'm sure that you have good supervisors, and I'm sure that if I had have expressed to my supervisor that I was struggling, she would have pushed me to do something. But it's just one of those things where I think if there was an awareness around it, rather than my friend who had no idea either, but rather than her just being like, did you hear about so-and-so, this happened, she would have been like, hey, does anyone know this person? And then if anyone did say yes, it's like, okay, now we pull them aside and just chat with them rather than just an off-the-cuff kind of comment.
So if one of your fellow police officers went to their supervisor and said, I'm kind of struggling here, I think I need some mental health help, does that happen? Or do police officers worry about being demoted or being looked at like, oh, they can't do their job anymore?
Yeah, so that's another thing that I'm very passionate about, is that it is not normal to go to your supervisor to express that you are struggling or that you have issues with your mental health, I guess. And I think issues is a really horrible word to use, but I can't pick anything else. It's something that I say a lot, is that in the role that we are in, you have to show strength. You go to those domestic violence jobs, you go to wherever you go, and you have to show strength. But that can also be our biggest detriment, in that showing strength means that we feel like we can't show our vulnerabilities and we can't show our weaknesses. And if we were to show our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses, that it might be detrimental to our job. So, which it wouldn't be, but there is this stigma around it where, they go, oh, you might get your gun taken off you. And then if that does happen, then you don't have your support network, which is your work colleagues and your friends that you're at work with. But it's not like that. That's just the stigma around it. And they're going to do everything that they can to keep you with your support network. But again, it is that stigma of people don't want to talk about their mental health, which is just, I just want to shake everyone, like, talk about it.
Yeah, that's me too. I have
Yeah.
particular topics, especially fentanyl right now. That fentanyl is crazy. And I want to shake people. Like, we just got to talk about it. Like, it's here. Whether you want to believe it or not, it's here.
Yeah.
What else are you passionate about?
Oh, so many things. I think like mental health is so massive, and that's because I have so many friends that have either gone through it or I see them going through it, and I know how we could prevent it. And then I know how people can get help. That's where my passion really lies, in that why is mental health seen as something so horrible when, you know, there's people that have reached out that have these issues like PTSD, and I've gone, you know what, you are so strong. You getting help is so strong. And I have a really good friend of mine who went through PTSD and is now on the other side of it and like absolutely just killing it. Like he is doing so well. And I hear from other people is just an amazing person to work for because he has gone through PTSD. He has an understanding of mental health. And so when there are really horrible jobs or something's happened, he is the right person to deal with it because he can pick up different signs in people that they wouldn't even pick up themselves. It's so nice to see that. And I think that should be how we promote mental health, of like, okay, you know, it could be bad and you may feel bad for a little while, but look how good you could do. There's going to be a little roller coaster ride in between, but you know, this is Goldie. Look how well he's doing. And now he's out on the other side and he is just blooming like, you know, like a beautiful flower.
I love it. You are like, I'm sitting here like she is a cheerleader. Like, this girl is a cheerleader for mental health. Get her some pom-poms because she's going. I love it.
Get me some blue and red pom-poms just to...
Yes. Our first responders need you. They need you. They need your message. They need your encouragement, your belief that they can get better, and your belief that you can break this stigma.
Yeah.
Absolutely admire you. I'm so glad that we met, and I'm so honored that you are here speaking with me today. So thank you for being you.
Thank you so much. I love being me. Thank you for having me on. It's been amazing.
Absolutely. You said so many great things. Oh, and please tell us where to find your podcast. That's really important.
Breaking the Stigma is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I do have a dedicated Instagram page for mental health. So it's not just Breaking the Stigma, but it's at jasmin.f.peach. So that's really cool. I put up a lot of things on there trying to promote mental health and just create an awareness.
Jasmin, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. I've loved it. It's been amazing.
Thank you for all that you do to help our law enforcement, police officers, first responders. It's truly amazing. This is Jen Lee. I am creator and host of I Need Blue podcast. To listen to additional stories, visit www.ineedblue.net. And remember, you are stronger than you think.